No, I guess whatever age you are, we've all seen those pictures of children with their best coats on and a gas mask in a cardboard box and a piece of string hung around their neck, getting onto trains and being taken away during the war to live in the countryside to get away from the bombing. The one thing I can't ever recall seeing much of is what happened to children during the First World War. I hope I'm about to get some answers. Liz Palmer joins me. Liz, we don't see those pictures in the same way, do we? Was that because children weren't evacuated then?
I think that might be one of the reasons. I think there's also less personal photography at that date, you know, people taking family photographs, although we're hoping that we might find some during the course of this project. And I think generally the experiences of the children being born or living through World War I are not widely known. They've not been very well researched so far. And
that is exactly what you're trying to do. You're trying to get people to say, right, my grandmother told me this, etc., etc. You're wanting to find out the stories, aren't you?
Yes, this is what we're hoping to do. I'm working on behalf of the Friends of Birmingham Archives and Heritage, and we've got funding through West Midlands Heritage Lottery Fund for a small project to research into the lives of children, specifically in Birmingham, during that time. And we're hoping to involve the community in both on the research side. We'll be able to teach them some research skills, and they'll be able to come and see some of the material that's in Birmingham archives. And there's things like school logbooks, hospital records, children's homes records. Some of them are closed for 100 years, but we should be able to look at the early years of the war. But on the other side, we're hoping that we might be able to gather more material because we think people probably do have things lurking in their loft, at the top of wardrobes, that relate to World War I. And so we're hoping people will come forward for that, whether or not they want to deposit it permanently in the archive or whether they'll just allow us to scan things. And we have got some, we're planning to do some digitisation as well.
So insofar as what we know already, you're kind of giving me the impression that children were not evacuated to the countryside in the way that they were in 39-45.
As far as we know, they weren't. I mean, it may have happened on a small scale with individual families, but they weren't necessarily at, you know, at specific risk living in the urban areas. Although certainly towards the end of the war, there were a couple of Zeppelin raids. There weren't any on Birmingham. I think they missed or didn't drop any bombs here. But there were some raids in Warsaw and other parts of the Black Country as well. So certainly children would have, well, children and adults would have started to experience that fear that they'd never had before, that actually war could come onto their doorstep. So that's certainly one of the things we hope we might be able to pick up through personal reminiscences in the form of letters, diaries, things like that, of that type of thing. But we also want to find out a bit more about what children were actually doing during the war, both to help the war effort or how things like their education might have been affected by the war.
Because going back some years, people were inveterate diary keepers, weren't there? There was somebody in every house who kept a diary of everything that happened.
Yes, indeed. And sometimes they've been lost, but sometimes they are kept by family members. Sometimes they may not have even been read or looked at, but we're hoping that some of those may surface. There's one or two in some archives. I haven't found any. Well, no, there are a couple in Birmingham archives that we know are there. It's finding them.
Yeah. You say that you're looking for what happened to Birmingham children because, of course, we need to remember, don't we, that education-wise, what was it, 12? Was that when they left school?
Yes,
around that time?
Yes, 12 was the leaving age. It was raised to 14 at the end of the war in 1918. So we're going to be looking at lives of children who were in school, but also, you know, as far as we're concerned, then their children up until about the age of 18. It was, you know, it's a bit variable. So we want to know what teenagers were doing as well. You know, if they left school, where were they working? Were they going and working in munitions factories? If we can find out information about that. We know that young children who were still at school, some of them were involved in a lot of the fundraising that was going on to help those returning soldiers who were disabled. They're also involved with things like there was something called the Tank Bank, and Birmingham was in competition with other cities around the country to raise funds for the war effort, and a tank came to Birmingham as publicity, and thousands turned out. But children were very involved with that as well in raising funds. And organisations like the Scouts and the Girl Guides, which had been set up shortly before World War I, they also had a role to play, and we wanted to see what they were doing. I've read some things about what they were doing nationally, but we want to know were they actually doing that locally and who was involved and the results.
Because of course leaving school at 12, the whole dynamic of their lives was different, wasn't it? There would be children at home till they went to school at 5 presumably, but they weren't there for very long, and then presumably during the wartime a lot of them, as you say, they would have been doing a job somewhere, not being children as such.
Yeah, very much so. And I mean, this was important for the family, because with fathers going away to war and maybe not coming back, or coming back disabled and unable to work, or unable to work in the jobs they'd had before, children from a very early age had to make a financial contribution. And of course we mustn't overlook the fact that the family was changing as well, because women during World War I, as we know, they went to work in munitions factories and a whole host of other jobs as well, where the menfolk had gone off to war. So the children were involved with also more in the home, with looking after their younger siblings as well.
And presumably there would have been a greater emphasis as well. Families were in the same home together, and grandmas were there. Just a final thought that strikes me, Liz, is this, that we've had the anniversary of the Somme at the weekend, and the extraordinary slaughter of lives. So a huge number of children would never have seen their fathers, would they, or hardly known them at all?
Well, this is the case. We know that nationally, something like 500,000 fathers never came back from the war. And so there would have been a lot of children that grew up barely knowing them. They might have been home for a couple of weeks on leave, but some of them wouldn't have come back. And even those that did come back, didn't come back the same people they'd been when they went away. Fascinating
to hear this. If people have got stuff for you, how can they get in touch with you?
If they get in touch with us, they can do it via a number of ways. We've set up a Facebook page now called Birmingham Children of War. There's a Twitter account which is Birmingham Children of War.
Right. We'll have to leave it there because we've got to go to a break. I'm being shouted at in my ear. People will find it. Liz, thank you very much for joining us.